oral testimony for minutes.
Thank you. We will now take action on the approval of the minutes. May I have a motion and a second to approve both the minutes from November 19th, 2020, our general business meeting, executive session, and December 17th, 2020, special meeting, and December 17, 2020, general business meeting. If I could have a motion to approve. Board Member Bakarse.
Aloha, Board Member Bakarse. I move to approve the meeting minutes of November 19th, 2020 general business meeting, executive session, December 17th, 2020 special meeting, and December 17th, 2020 general business meeting.
Thank you. May I have a second? Board Member Fallon.
I second the motion.
Thank you very much. If there are no objections, we will approve the minutes from those specific meetings. We are now moving to item number 4, which is our Student Achievement Committee report. The committee met this morning, and I will now ask board staff to call on any testifiers who have signed up to provide oral testimony on this agenda item.
Hello, Board Chair. There are no oral testimony for this agenda item.
Thank you. I would now like Committee Chairperson Margaret Cox to provide the Student Achievement Committee report on
Chairperson Kaine Kalamai,
Yes.
as you know, our list is live, and so we acknowledge a very quick millisecond sign up. One moment, please.
Okay.
Susan Piccola Davis. Susan, can you hear me?
Sure, Gina, hi.
Hello,
I thought
hi.
I signed up for this. Oops, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hello?
Hello, Susan, can you hear me?
Hello?
Susan, I can hear you.
Oh, good, sorry. Hi.
Hi.
Aloha, committee chair and members. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the Student Achievement Committee report that we heard this morning. Assistant Superintendent Unibasami's presentation is reality. I think that any requests for deviation from her presentation will be unrealistic. I'm strongly asking for student rep Hunter to elaborate on his comments that he provided this morning regarding the student perspective, and please listen to him carefully. Lastly, I would ask that on slide 9, there are 4 pie charts. I would ask for one more pie chart to be allocated for distance learning students whose schools decided to remain in full distance learning for Q3, not by parent choice, but by school choice. Thank you for the opportunity.
Chair Payne, that concludes oral testimony for this agenda item.
Thank you. We will now have the Student Achievement Committee report from Committee Chairperson Margaret Cox.
Thank you, Chair. Maggie Cox here. The Student Achievement Committee agenda had only one item, and that was the presentation on the Department of Education requirements and guidance regarding calculating student hours for the 2020-2021 school year in accordance with Hawaii Revised Statutes Section 3028-251, which, among other things, states 180 instructional days. Now, our student attendance is kept by each school on Infinite Campus. And our schools all have different models of either face-to-face, blended learning, or on virtual. And by the beginning of this school year, with 9 instructional days converted to teacher training for COVID issues, it's very clear that 180 days will not be met. And so in the future, we will have to discuss or put on an agenda a waiver. And that's all of the report.
Thank you, Chair Cox, for that report, and thank you to the department and the deputy for providing that information to us. Is there any comment from board members before we move on? Okay, seeing none, we are now to our action items. And if there is any testimony on the first action item.
Yes, Chair
we'll hear it
Payne,
now.
we have Vanessa Ott.
Thank you.
Vanessa Ott, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you have 3 minutes. Please proceed.
Thank you. Aloha, board chair and members. When I was reading about the lawsuit on behalf of Noah, it was very sad. Now, I understand that until there's a trial outcome, it hasn't been proven that the DOE was negligent, but based on my experiences with the DOE, I do suspect it's true. Based on my personal experiences, I'm willing to bet that any attempts at resolving this case outside of court were stonewalled by the DOE and the AG's office. Accepting responsibility for wrongdoing is not the DOE's strong suit. And it's the same old story, one shattered life after another. If they're requesting a jury trial, I sure hope they get it, because over the last 2 years, I've learned how corrupt the state system for delivering on the promise of procedural safeguards for special education students, how corrupt and inept it really is. Now, I want to address what was brought up in that document concerning DOE vetting of special education teachers. I know from personal experience that the bar for accepting SPED teachers in the DOE is extremely low. Last year, my kid's SPED teacher, language arts teacher, had no SPED training, was an emergency hire, and didn't even have any training in education at all. I know this because I had to make repeated inquiries, but finally obtained all the teachers' qualifications. And according to the Teacher Standard Board, this type of hire is perfectly acceptable. So we have people who are not qualified to even be teachers becoming special education teachers. Now, as the board, I asked the board to deal with these kinds of issues more proactively rather than reactively, and people having to go through lawsuits that probably they won't win, because I think the system is stacked against them. But here's some suggestions. I would really like that the board direct that the DOE or the Hawaii Teacher Standards Board or together, that they maintain a publicly accessible database of all the teachers and teachers' aides with their educational experience, their qualifications, and their certifications. And there could be a check mark that or a date as to when they passed a background check. And that could have maybe solved or prevented this lawsuit from happening. And the other thing that I would like to ask for is that the board get some information to audit what's going on with the Attorney General's office in terms of all the costs for all of the complaints that have come in the past 5 years regarding special education, for due process hearings, and for court costs, because I think there's a lot of expense going on because things are not being dealt with.
Chair Payne, that concludes oral testimony for this agenda item.
Thank you. Before we start discussing this agenda item, I would like to remind board members to raise your hands on WebEx and wait for me to call on you before unmuting your microphone. I have a proposed motion. Thank you to board staff that I believe encompasses what we discussed in our meeting. I'm going to read it, and if it is acceptable to board members, then I will need someone to make a motion or to make make a different motion, but we do need to make a motion before we can take action. My proposed motion is that we move to authorize Board Chairperson Catherine Payne to act on behalf of the board for purposes of Kimokea versus Hawaii State Board of Education as discussed in executive session. If that motion is acceptable, I would need to have someone make that motion, and Board Vice Chair Uemura.
I move. I so move.
Okay, it's been moved. May I have a second, please? Board Member Bakarse.
Board Member Bakarsi, I second the motion.
Thank you. We need to take a roll call vote on this. So I'm going to start with Board Vice Chair Uemura.
Aye.
Board Member Asher.
Aye.
Board Member Bakarse.
Aye.
Board Member Cox.
Aye.
Board Member Fallon.
Aye.
Board Member Nama'u.
Aye.
Board Member Takeno.
Aye.
Board Member Voss.
Aye.
Okay, the motion has passed, and I will serve as the point of contact for this particular case. We are now to item B on our agenda in section 5. This is action on the Department of Education's plan for the use of federal funds in the new COVID-19 relief package and annual federal spending bill. I will now ask board staff to call on any testifiers who have signed up to provide oral testimony on this agenda item. And remember that testifiers will receive 3 minutes.
Susan Pecola Davis, followed by Rebecca Hadley Schlosser, Julie Reese Oda, Corey Rosenlee. Susan Pecola Davis, can you hear me?
I sure can.
Mahalo, Susan.
Good
Please
afternoon.
proceed.
My testimony has to do with the ESSER funding and the board's commitment to keeping a close eye on what's going on in the legislature regarding education. I heard some board members this morning, actually pleading about the way the funds are being spent. And there were 2 bills this week, one on Tuesday and one on Wednesday, HB 613, HD1, and SB 270, which basically trying to say, I don't know if it's actually going to happen, but dictating, I should say, that the Board of Education and the superintendent of the Department of Education sign a type of a contract saying that they will only spend the money to make sure that teachers aren't taken from the classroom. And I really wanted to read that piece to you. However, the point is that I hear you all saying that you want to support the superintendent. And it hasn't been parts of my testimonies in the past where I'm talking about supporting the superintendent. But if that is your reality, you guys can't just send in written testimonies. I've seen Chairwoman Payne's testimony in writing, and I've seen several of those, okay? It's totally different when you have to get oral in front of them on Zoom and present whether you're for it or against it. And I just suggest that, you know, if you guys are going to back up the superintendent, then you need to get on board with testifying at the legislature. Yeah, you don't want to be on that Zoom camera, and I've done it a number of times, but it's very hard when you say you're going to support somebody and then you don't actually do it. I'd like to say that it's a struggle for everybody, but the buck stops at the legislature. They have got to figure out how they're going to find the money, okay? It read, the funds appropriated shall not be released or expended by the Department of Education unless the board.
Rebecca Hadley Schlosser, Julie Reyes Oda, Corey Rosenlee, Laverne Moore. Rebecca, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Payne and members of the Board of Education. I'm Rebecca Hadley Schlosser, a proud special education teacher and a proud member of the Hawaii State Teachers Association. This is my 29th year of teaching, all as a special education teacher. Of my 29 years, 24 of those years have been spent here in Hawaii, with all but one of those years having been spent on the Waianae Coast, teaching our most vulnerable students. We talk a lot about a teacher shortage, but we need to reframe the discussion to it being a shortage of master's level educated professionals who will work for $35,000 shortage. We also hear the saying, teachers don't teach for the income, teachers teach for the outcome. Rather than saying this, we should be saying, teachers are skilled professionals who deserve a competitive income. Professional level pay is how to thank all teachers for their hard work, especially in this year of COVID. When I started teaching in Hawaii back in 1997, we were in the throes of the Felix Consent Decree, and all special education services were being monitored at the federal level. We worked very hard as the state and at our individual schools to ensure that we were meeting all the needs of our students, especially those who had mental health needs that had not been properly addressed prior to this. By working hard and ensuring that we were providing proper support for all students, we were able to be released from the consent decree. My greatest fear right now is that with all the budget cuts and proposed use of federal funds in the new COVID-19 relief package, especially to special education, we're going to end up in a consent decree again with an even bigger price tag than Felix. Another concern I have is directing funds to private tutors and an accelerated personalized learning program when we are losing teaching positions. It's a slap in the face to teachers who have been working extremely hard this year to plan to do this with the money. Wouldn't it make more sense to invest money into our current teachers rather than hiring someone who is not a current employee to do the exact work we are doing in our classes? Please consider current teacher morale. It is low because of all these cuts. Currently, I know of teachers who have left or are leaving at the end of this school year. You as a Board of Education can take a stance to tell the teachers that you value us and want us to remain in our positions, rather than diverting money to possible out-of-state entities who are not grounded in the culture of Hawaii and working with our students. Use the power you have to ensure that we don't lose more teacher positions. I'm disheartened to see the number of special education teacher positions that are being lost due to budget cuts. We just had the first year that we have a high number of highly qualified licensed special education teachers teaching in special education positions. If the differentials that were used to make this gain are lost, we will see high numbers of special education teachers leaving. This could also lead us back into another Felix consent decree. Parents are going to get tired of their child not receiving appropriate services, and we will have another class action lawsuit filed against the state. Why is it that anytime budgets need to be cut, the DOE's budget seems to be the one that gets cut the most? This should not be happening in a state that says it values teachers. If you truly value that we are all currently putting our lives at risk during this pandemic by showing up daily in our classrooms and teaching, show it. Do not be afraid to say these cuts and plans for the use of the federal funds are not in the best interest of our students. Please stand with all school employees and tell the state enough is enough. Failure to do so shows that
Julie Reyes Ora, followed by Corey Rosenlee, Laverne Moore, Sarah Tochiki, Julie Reyes Oda, Nanakuli High and Intermediate School. Julie, can you hear me?
Is it 2 or 3 minutes?
3 minutes, Julie.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Please proceed.
Thanks. My name is Julie Reyes Oda. I'm a math teacher at Nanakuli High and Intermediate School and a public school mom. I'm commenting on the use of federal funds. I was going to comment on this, but I want to say some things first. In the previous special meeting at 11 o'clock, I heard Superintendent Kishimoto practically threaten this board with legal action if she doesn't get her way about canceling differentials. She asked for direction from the board if she doesn't get her way about the differentials. She asked for direction from the board, but I've personally spoken with legislators and they said that she takes no direction from them. Let's stop playing games. Superintendent Kishimoto, the board's giving you direction today. Write it down. But back to the topic. My understanding is that the department hasn't spent all the money from the first COVID relief package. I've given testimony previously about tutoring. Now it's called Accelerated Personal Learning Program. I do not agree that $48.5 million should be spent on this. Yes, we have problems with student achievement, but the solution is not tutors. We have not spent any time diagnosing the problem. Why don't we use the money for things like fully funding a teacher recruitment program so we don't scare teachers away? Or set aside the money to offset losses in the future, since the future is so uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen. There might be a next round of stimulus. There may not be. So let's just not spend the money to spend the money. But if we're going to spend the money, let's not send this money out of state. I'm still trying to figure out how hiring 4 out-of-state companies for, quote, one-on-one, on-demand tutoring support, small group academic coaches, and other high-touch monitoring and academic supports will do that without either hiring cheap mainlanders online or contracting local people. In essence, creating a pimp and prostitute relationship. An example where the mainland business could get like $100 an hour and I get $20 an hour. And I don't want to be the prostitute in this situation. So deny the request for tutoring. Chairperson Payne, I don't pretend to know what's within your powers, but if it is to create the agenda, please place the discussion for a new superintendent on the March 4th board meeting. After hearing what happened today, I think we had enough. Thank you.
Corey Rosalie, followed by Laverne Moore, Sarah Tochiki, Sherry Nakamura, Aravind Bayou. Corey Rosalie, President, HSTA. Corey, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you so much. Chair Payne, members of the Board of Education. In the last few days, even after HSTA submitted our testimony, HSTA has had a chance to discuss how the DOE should use the federal ESSER II funds. We've discussed this with you, the board members, legislators, and community leaders. The one thing we have observed from these conversations is how many unanswered questions still exist. Therefore, HSTA recommends to the Board of Education that the most prudent action right now is to defer this measure. There are important questions that need to be answered before moving forward. Number one, what will the impact of President Biden's $1.9 trillion stimulus bill be on funding? The plan pending before Congress contains $130 billion for education, which could bring close to $450 million in federal aid to Hawaii's public schools. The stimulus bill will most likely pass next month. Knowing the exact amount and the stipulations, in combination with the previous stimulus bills, will give this board and the legislature a better picture of how to decide how to use all the funding. 2, the stimulus bill also contains $350 billion for state and local governments, in addition to the school aid, and all of that is just a portion of more than $1 billion in relief funds for Hawaii. How will that total aid impact the base budgeting for the DOE? 3, the DOE is requesting $20 million for unemployment insurance and workers' compensation. The governor previously gave the DOE $14 million to meet these needs. Will the governor use current stimulus funds to pay for these needs? And next, should the Department of Education also be treated like other departments within the government? 4, How much will the DOE get for reimbursement of PPE gear from the FEMA, which President Biden recently announced? 5, how will the amendment to the state legislature's HB 613 and SB 270 to not take fringe benefit costs out of federal stimulus money impact spending if passed by lawmakers? And final, the DOE decided this week to inform schools that it will restore 100% of special education and 99% of weighted student formula to next school year's budget, based on their hope for federal stimulus money and restoration of $100 million to the DOE's base budget by the legislature. If these developments do not occur, the superintendent has stated that she would use current stimulus funding. Since the DOE is also unsure of these key factors, the best thing to do is to wait a few weeks to make the most informed decision. Thank you.
Laverne Moore, Sarah Tochiki, Sherry Nakamura, Aravind Bayou, Lynn Otaguro. Laverne Moore, HSTA. Laverne, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you. Aloha, board. Laverne Moore, special education teacher at McKinney High School, speak in opposition of the use of federal funds in the new COVID-19 relief package and annual federal spending bill to hire private tutors for students instead of saving qualified teacher positions. This money should be returned to schools via the weighted student formula and special education funding, not hiring private tutors. Why? Because teachers have developed a trusted relationship with their students. They know the academic needs and strengths and are best able to provide tutoring in contrast to hiring private tutors or a software program. At McKinley High School, our targeted SPED students are offered after-school tutoring by educational assistants in collaboration with the classroom teacher. I personally call students at night or weekends to assist them in completing assignments, for a number of them have difficulty with internet connections. Summer learning is useless because high school students need the support now to pass their classes rather than making up a class in the summer. Also, if they are not attending school now, why would they attend in the summer? I urge the Board of Education to maintain Hawaii's qualified teacher positions and not outsource tutoring to private providers. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Sarah Tochiki, followed by Sherry Nakamura, Aravind Bayou, Lynn Otaguro. Sarah Tochiki, HSTA. Sarah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Tochiki, and I'm the band director at Chiefus Kamakahele Middle School on Kauai. I'm the vice president of the Kauai chapter of HSTA, and this is my testimony for item 5B regarding the use of federal funds for education. Let us all be clear, adequate funding is not a conversation that arose from the economic crisis of this pandemic. Schools are perpetually underfunded. In each of the 13 years of my career in the Hawaii State Department of Education, I ran out of the copies allotted to me at the copy machine. I'm curious, does the state DOE office have unlimited copies at their machines? Help me to understand why it is so hard to justify routing federal education funding directly to schools and educators. Our schools service 100% of the population, regardless of whether someone has a family member in the school system. Somewhere in our classrooms are the next doctors who will heal us, the mechanics that will fix our vehicles, the business owners that will grow our economy. Well-funded education means better lives for everyone. As a music educator, I am especially worried about funding for elective classes like music because they are not considered essential. Somewhere along the line, someone who was not an educator decided that SBA reading and math scores were the biggest indicator of a school's effectiveness. The superintendent said testing must happen this spring because we already paid for the contract. How can we say the profits of a testing corporation are more important than the well-rounded education of our students? I only see my students once a week on the blended model. I want to teach them, not test them unnecessarily. Students come to school for their electives, where we spark their creativity and foster their growth mindset. Leaders in our community talk about diversifying our economy away from the reliance on tourism. How can we talk about diversifying our economy with the tech industry or the arts or innovation if we defund the classes where these interests are fostered in students? Please do not allow programs like music to be cut in our schools because of budget shortfalls. We can use this federal funding to make sure that schools have adequate funding. Now more than ever, we need to work together. Our GLOs set goals for students to be community contributors, complex thinkers, quality producers, and effective communicators. If adults, especially those in state leadership positions, cannot even model these skills, how can we expect our students to do them? Educators have to speak up because we know our input is crucial to finding a solution, and it does not seem like the state is listening. We are drowning here, and instead of throwing us a life vest, they are making us use our remaining energy to yell from one and then diverting that life vest to other entities, all who are private and not even in our state. Can we please work together to decide how we're going to use this funding to best support our keiki? Thank you very much for your time.
Sherry Nakamura, followed by Aravind Bayu, Lynn Otaguro. Sherry Nakamura, Executive Director, Hui for Excellence in Education Coalition, also referred to as He'e Coalition. Sherry, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you. Aloha Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the board. My name is Sherry Nakamura, Director of HEA Coalition. We are testifying on action item 5B in opposition to the department's plan for use of the ESSER II funds. You have our written testimony, but we wanted to highlight some points. We have been advocating consistently that we think the priority for any funding should be at the school level in the classroom. We are hoping that the governor's $123 million will be restored to schools. We think that any remaining deficit should be made up by the federal funds as a stopgap measure. If we have funds beyond restoring school level budgets, we think that the DOE should make tactical investments in initiatives that will have long-lasting positive impacts on our students. And we cite some examples in our testimony. These include building an effective framework for literacy during the elementary years and shoring up the existing RTI process for our struggling students. These initiatives take place in the classroom during the school year when all of our students are present. We think these are smart, strategic ways of addressing learning loss. We also think implementing a resource management process to help schools be more efficient would be another strategic initiative. This would help the schools have tighter operations in both good and bad economic times. Thank you for this opportunity to testify.
Aravind Bayu, followed by Lynn Otaguro. Aravind Bayu, HSTA. Aravind, can you hear me? And Ekalamayawu, if I have mispronounced your name. Aravind, your mic is not on. Aravind, if we are unable to connect your microphone, we will need to move on. I will give you a couple of seconds. Aravind Bayu, HSTA. Moving on, Lynn Otaguro. Lynn Otaguro, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me? Can you
Yes,
hear me?
Lynn. Yes, please proceed.
Thank you very much. Aloha Chair Payne and Board of Education. I've watched the Department of Education in our schools for a long time. I was a student, a mother, a child of a teacher. I advised the board at one time. I was a teacher, and now I'm a retired teacher and mother of a teacher. So I've been watching for a while. At times in education and in other things, we are tempted to choose what might be the easy answer, the fast answer, the contract, the program that will somehow fix things, fill learning gaps. But if we're honest with ourselves, we know there is no easy answer. We've tried some of these things before and been disappointed. No single contract will fix our problems. Rather than contract out our problems, we should keep the work in-house. Use the federal resources to maintain our personnel, to keep structure and consistency in our schools. And as Sherry Nakamura said in her testimony, use the resources to make our schools better and support them in making them better. Use the teachers and the staff who are in the best place to address the issues that our students have with learning. Because our teachers and staff, they know the curriculum and the standards that they want our students to achieve. They know our students best. And in times of crisis, wouldn't you as a student want to be with someone you know? Wouldn't you learn best with someone you know? Keeping the work and the resources in our schools also means that this is an investment in our schools. We're not shipping out our money and our problems. We're not taking it away from our schools. We're putting it in our schools so that our schools can maintain staffing and can have the opportunity for themselves to develop and grow and learn from this experience as well and become better in the end. Please support our schools and staff. Keep the federal funds in our schools for now and for the future. Thank you.
Chair Payne, this concludes oral testimony for this agenda item.
Thank you. We've also received written testimony on this agenda item, and it is publicly posted on the board's website. We will now move on to the discussion, and I would like to call on Brian Hallett, Assistant Superintendent of the Office of Fiscal Services, to present.
Aloha, Board Chair. It's actually Superintendent Kishimoto.
Okay, that's fine. Go ahead.
Thank you. Board members and members of the public, thank you for joining us for this important conversation. You have our recommendation memo before you, and please allow me to summarize and highlight some of the key information. On January 5th, the department received the long-awaited and very welcome news that it will be receiving the $183.6 million of federal elementary and secondary school emergency relief, or ESSER 2 funds. The allowable uses of these funds cover 15 areas. They're detailed on pages 4 and 5 of the recommendation memorandum, which include all of the same allowable uses from the first ESSER allocation and 3 new uses. The 3 new uses are addressing learning loss, preparing schools for reopening, and addressing facility air quality issues. During the January 21st Finance and Infrastructure Committee meeting, the department made a recommendation on the planned use of the funds. Earlier that same day, the governor notified the department that the department and the board of his intention to restore $123 million in his biennium budget request. The agenda item was ultimately not acted upon at the FIC meeting and the GBM, and so this is our discussion continuing today. This proposed use of federal ESSER 2 funds is being contemplated in the midst of the legislature's deliberations on the governor's biennium budget request. That request initially contained $264 million in cuts for education without factoring labor saving options that are now being discussed through the collective bargaining process. The cuts to the department's base budget and the governor's budget now stands at $141 million. I think it's important for the public to be aware of some of the work that's happening internally. You heard me make reference to the $123 million that the governor reinstated into our budget. Those are permanent funds. And what we have done at this point is allocated those back to schools. And this will allow us now to bring down our SPA or special ed deficit from that shortfall down to 0, and so that's fully funded again. And the WSF shortfall is now brought down to only 1%. And so we're making progress in reinstating funds to schools. Principals now have to go through the task of revisiting their financial plans based on their overall academic plan. So there'll be more information forthcoming from the school sites as they work through this process. For this legislative session, the department has defined 3 major priorities. One is restoration of the $100.2 million base budget cut. Those are funds that are necessary to have back in our base budget. The second is to retain and maximize federal relief funds to stabilize public schools. And the third is to pursue predictability and reliability of funding to support public education. And there is a bill both on the Senate and House side where that conversation is occurring right now. The proposed use of the federal funds is consistent with these three priorities and based on a strategy of seeking the reservation of recurring base budget funds to recurring positions. It also proposes the board approve the use of federal funds to ensure alignment with board priorities and using the one-time federal relief funds to meet expenses that are largely non-recurring and or pandemic related. The proposal seeks to program federal funds in a balanced way of addressing several needs, particularly non-recurring needs. So the proposal before you is providing charter schools a pro rata share, which is approximately $9 million. The second is meeting current year shortfall, $79.4 million. We need to take action to start addressing that shortfall. The third is offsetting a portion of the $41.1 million program review reduction, which still remains. And so there's a proposed allocation of $14.5 million. The fourth priority listed is the learning loss mitigation strategy for an accelerated personalized learning program targeting assistance for nearly 30,000 students in grades 1 through 8 that are performing 2 or more years behind in math and or reading or English language arts, as well as to fund computer device refreshers for schools to acquire approximately 15,000 new and replacement computers. Please note that the learning loss mitigation strategy is meant to set aside dollars knowing that we have students that even after years of being in our schools, receiving supports, they are still not meeting grade level expectations, and we need to provide them additional ways of engaging them in learning. And so this allocation is not for privatized tutoring, which I think that's just been repeated several times, and I will keep repeating that is not the intention. The intention is to have the principals design a program based on where their students are, that's personalized to each individual child on why they have not been successful year over year. That does not preclude adding time, extending learning time, using our own staff. That's all on the table to be designed. And finally, health and safety measures is the last item, which is $15 million set aside, some of which may be addressed elsewhere, depending on FEMA's guidelines to carry out a new Biden administrative executive order regarding PPEs that's in place through September 2021. And so as we get more guidance around that, we may be able to actually reduce what's allocated there from 15 million to 3 million. This proposal is in line with our legislative strategy to advocate for permanent funds for permanent positions. If the legislature does not fully fund us and restore our base budget, then I would request that the board revisit all federal fund allocations. Our goal collectively has been to make sure we protect first closest to the classroom and ensure that our students have what they need. And so we do have the opportunity to ensure that we're not expending against these federal funds until we have a full budget story and a budget outlook for next school year. Additional information on the department's planned uses of the federal funds is reflected in attachment A. This is the department's proposed use of federal funds at this point in time based on the outlook of conversations with the legislature and pushing on this conversation to fully fund and restore our base budget. And also as we continue conversation around the MOE or maintenance of effort requirement that's contained in the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriation Act that's required there. So thank you. I am available for questions. I also have with me CFO Hallett, who's also available to answer questions from the board. So mahalo.
Thank you, Superintendent. Before we start discussing this agenda item, again, reminding the board on the procedures of hand raising, the department is recommending approval of this proposal to use federal ESSER 2 funds as described in the memorandum. So before we begin discussing it and asking questions of the superintendent, we need to have a motion to approve the recommendation. So I need to have that motion and second, and then we'll begin discussion of the matter. I am not seeing any hands here. Does that mean that it's not our motion yet and there will be no discussion? Is that the board member Voss?
Well, since no one else wants to go ahead, I'll try something. I am uncomfortable with the recommendations for the biennium for the next fiscal year. But it is important, as the superintendent said, that we have a conversation as to the shortfalls in the current fiscal year, including particularly the salary differential program that we just restored funds for this year, for which there are none, and the school service, food service program, one of our most critical programs that is facing a large shortfall of as much as $25 million this year. So for discussion purposes only, just to make sure that we have at least a discussion about that and some of the other matters that Ken discussed, I would move that the board approve the department's proposed allocation of funds only for the current fiscal year.
Thank you, board member Voss. And it is important to remind people that just because we have a motion that you have made, it does not necessarily mean that you support it, but it is important, I think, for us to have a discussion of these matters because that is what I believe is expected. Board member Fallon.
Based on the understanding that this is for discussion purposes, I second the motion.
Okay. We will now enter into discussion. We are not voting on the motion. We are entering into discussion. So is there anyone who has questions for the superintendent or for Assistant Superintendent Hallett? And I see board member Fallon's hand is still up, so go right ahead with the question.
Thank you, Chair Payne. I was very pleased in late January to learn of the $123 million being added back into the DOE budget, which reduced the 10% cut to around 2% plus. I'm also pleased to hear from the department that with those general fund dollars being added back, that EDN 100 reduction now is only at 1%, and EDN 150, which is SPED, is 0. So that's very good news. If the proposal is supported by the ledge and use of general fund monies is supported by the ledge for these positions at the school level, what it'll enable the schools to do is to have sustainability and predictability to their very important, frontline role with our students. I also understand that 123 doesn't pay for all of the needs, that there still remain substantial cuts to the department. So if you look at just ESSER and the 186 million, and theoretically 40 million of the initial 10% cut remaining to be cut, I have some questions for the department about impact to our schools and our staff when you shift from general fund to federal funds. I understand that federal, we're in a very unique circumstance. And I also believe that federal funds are short-term in nature. And really a last choice scenario because we have no choice. So I feel that from a public policy standpoint, general fund is critical to sustainability and long-term. So as far as impact in shifting from general fund to federal funds now, what would be the impact to the positions? Would they become temporary in nature while they're now permanent? How would the fringe be paid? You know, these are really important questions because if we use federal funds at some point in time, we need to figure out a way to add back permanently using general funds. So what is the impact of using federal funds for some of the positions that may currently need to be cut? And of the total that's being restored, how many remain then in that 40 million?
Thank you, Board Member Fallon, for your question. These are great questions, and they've been at the heart of our conversation with at the legislature. So I'm going to have I'm going to have A.S. Hallett just speak to some of these impacts as we've been describing them to the legislature, as well as we advocate for restoration of base funding. A.S. Hallett.
Thank you, Superintendent. Brian Hallett, CFO. Sorry, my earpiece fell out. In looking at the attachment to the memorandum, if we could maybe address the second question first, which was what would be the impact to positions? Looking at page 10 of attachment B, we can see the number of FTEs that would still be impacted by the $41 million with the looking at each program. So it totals about 35.5 positions. So of course, you know, we never came forth with estimates for the FTE impacts in the budget for WSF and SPA. And the hope is that with the restoration of the funds, that those level of positions nowhere near would be impacted. But the harder question, I think, was the first question is what would be the impact at the school level of using federal funds in place of general funds? And I think that really depends on how it is imposed or imposed on us by the legislature. We have experience with this from about 12 years ago with state fiscal stabilization funds, the ARA funds, during the Great Recession. The way those were implemented were reductions at a generic level, not at the position level, but at a higher level in the budget. So all of our general fund positions continued to be paid with general funds, and we had a negative overlaid into our budget that was offset by the use of federal funds. So essentially, the impact to schools and to positions and to incumbents, there was no impact. That was done with the recognition that the federal funds were being used to close a funding gap for a limited period of time. And I think we would all hope that would be the approach or the expectation for how we would go forward with the use of federal funds, that federal funds would be closing a limited term gap, and that we wouldn't, be an assumption that it would be, we would have a funding cliff at the end. At some point, we're going to get through this drop in state revenues and return to something that looks more normal. Second issue related to that is fringes. Also, 12 years ago, there was a proviso included in the budget bill that exempted both the University of Hawaii and the Department of Education from having to pay fringes for when federal stabilization funds were used to support payroll. That is of tremendous benefit, and it helps with strategic planning. As you may know, when positions are budgeted as federal funded positions, normal process is that the source of funds has to pay the fringe cost. And currently that fringe assessment is about 51% of the cost of a position. So if a position was a $50,000 position, we'd have to factor in another $25,000 just to cover the fringe cost of that position. So I hope that answered your question. Let me know if I need to clarify anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. So there's another part to the question because I'm trying to help everyone understand, including myself, kind of this big picture of the budget, what has been added back so that now we don't have to, assuming it's the 123 million requests from the governor is supported, that the positions can remain general funded, which gives us some perpetuity and sustainability. So there's maybe 40 million left of that initial request that needs to be funded through federal funds. And you described the impact or non-impact. The remainder, going back to the 100 million that was cut, where is the 100 million budgeted in the state budget? The reason, it's an important question, because if we're asking the ledge to restore what was cut, we need to understand where that money was budgeted and how it's been expended, and if it's been expended and why not. Can you please provide some detail?
Thank you. This is Brian again. I'm looking right now for a previous memorandum to the board where we detailed out the use of that, or where the $100.2 million was taken from. I'm looking at the December 3rd, 2020 memorandum now, and if anyone, on page 3 of that memo, we list out by EDN where those cuts were located. Rather than tell you, okay, 35 million in EDN 100, 4 million in 150, 1.7 million in 200, 2.3 million in state administration, 55 million in EDN 400, and 115,000 in EDN 500. There are additional materials that we've provided in the past that explained how we are absorbing those or managing those reductions this year. Maybe I'll just pick one large example, which is EDN 400. $50 million of that $55.8 million cut to EDN 400 was based on a one-time adjustment we made for anticipation of using impact aid in place of general funds for us to maintain our student transportation program. That is not a sustainable reduction, and we cannot afford to impose those reductions where they currently lie in our budget in fiscal year 22. And that's a big part of the point we've been trying to explain to folks, that these reductions were never intended to be recurring. They were always intended to be one-time reductions, and that's why we've been trying to plead our case. This is one of our top priorities, is to seek the restoration of the $100 million. What I would expect that if we aren't heard and those reductions carry forward, that we would need to come back and relook at where are those reductions in the budget, and where would they more logically or reasonably be placed in order to have the minimum, to minimize the impact of student learning. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Brian. I guess one final question, and thank you everyone for bearing with me. So if we look now, which is what is being proposed for today, at the 186 million, there are a lot of moving parts still, correct? And variables that impact how the 186 million is to be spent, or is it 183? I can't remember which. Is that correct? It seems as if it's been a moving target going for months, and a lot of twists and turns. So I guess it's a comment because I don't hear a response. And I am concerned about decisions with many moving parts.
Yes, there are many moving parts. I think the motion by Chair Voss it's a very good point that the current year, I think we have the most certainty and visibility on our current year issues, and that as we look further down the line, there are more and more unknowns.
Yes. So one of the funding proposals is to fund the differentials. And so I had more of a technical question. I also noticed that 9 million is to go to charters, correct?
Yes.
Would the funding for, and so this affects many Hawaiian immersion charter programs, whether they're conversion charter or, you know, the more traditional charter. And so would the charter schools have to fund their differentials with the 9 million?
That would be at their discretion. But they are already having to pay their differentials. So this would be supplemental funds that could help them if they haven't already found a way to do so.
So the policy based on responsibility, either statutorily or budget-wise, is that the charters would have to pay their differentials with the 9 million federal ESSER funds, according to your plan.
It wouldn't come with those strings attached. And let me just add that for special education positions budgeted out of ED 150 that are used or report to charter schools, the department would be covering the differential for those positions. But this allocation to charter schools is based on state law in section 302D, section 28, that it instructs us to provide a proportionate share of federal funds the department receives to charter schools, or to have them benefit equally. It does not come because these funds, I think they would be subject essentially to those is it 15 allowable uses that came that govern the use of what's allowable uses for the ESSER funds. So they would, each individual school would, I think, need to look at what are their current needs, where are their current gaps, and make decisions accordingly.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you everyone for allowing me the many questions. I yield.
Thank you, Board Member Fallon. Vice Chair Uemura.
Thank you, Chair Payne. I just wanted to give some comments and you know, sort of maybe give a proposal on how we should be looking at the recommendation. But I do want to say I do appreciate the effort that the superintendent and CFO Hallett have done today. You know, having been the CFO myself, I understand how the juggling takes place, and there are a lot of numerous moving parts, as Member Fallon has stated, and how you determine how these federal stimulus funds are to be used. And of course, with that, there are many assumptions that have to be made. One thing that should be obvious to all of us is that the stimulus funds are not enough to cover all of the cost reductions. So I just wanted to provide some history. Superintendent Aller recapped the $100.2 million that was taken away with Act 9, $165 million due to the cost reduction, and the $95 million that Member Fallon had alluded to in her earlier questions in the underfunded current operating costs. Now, the stimulus funds amount to $83.6 million, of which $9 million goes to the charter schools. So keep that total in mind. The Governor Ige gave $123 million of the general council revenues increase back to the DOE to reduce this $165 million cost reduction. So that's where you get the $42 million shortfall there. Unfortunately, the $123 million is not guaranteed to the DOE, since the money was given back after the budget was submitted to the legislature. So the legislature really controls where that increase in council revenues money goes. And I know we've seen the superintendent has shared with us a memo basically on how she intends to repurpose that $123 million. But I wanted to make sure that, you know, the board members see what's in the pot that they're considering, superintendent and CFO Hallett is looking at. But, you know, from my perspective, given all the variables, the board should continue to give the department the ability to recommend the use of the federal funds under board policy 303-2, but give the department guidance in how the funds used should be prioritized. So once we do that, then the recommendation follows from that. And then it'd be sort of an easier process for the board to then take a look at the recommendation, because right now we're going too granular. We're looking at too much detail because it's going to change. It's a moving part. So my recommendation would be to prioritize the fund uses as follows. Of course, you have 9 million to the charter schools, but, and just hear me out on this. The priorities will be fund teachers extra compensation through the biennium year ended 2023. So that's, covering 2 years going forward. Fund all of the teacher positions that was cut due to the 10% cost reduction. Fund to protect any potential cut in teacher pay, either through permanent cuts or furlough. And then from there, you fund other needs. Okay, so other needs could be whatever the department feels that they need to fund, but these are the priority that they should be looking at. So having said that, I understand that the department has strategically proposed to have permanent funding rather than temporary funding for a teacher position. And strategically, it has basis, but not in the current environment we are in. Using the 123 million restoration of funding cuts is not guaranteed and potentially put us in the same position we are with the teacher extra compensation funding. So if we go back and say, well, we're gonna fund certain of the teachers' position through the 123 million, that's not guaranteed. So it's taking a risk there. And the issue for me is that, to me, putting the teachers in a position of maybe having funding, creating all that angst of not having a job or taking a significant pay reduction, is not appealing. The federal stimulus funding, yes, it's a temporary funding, source of funding, but it does provide the financial bridge that we need to keep our teachers and the opportunity for things to improve. So what I'm saying is that we have the money now. Let's take care of our immediate needs, which is the teachers, because you cannot educate our kids without teachers, right? So give them the security that they are going to be funded. And then whatever else we need, we can look towards the 123 million that we go to the legislature. But don't forget, the Biden administration, a lot of people think that it's probably a good chance of passing, and it was stated next month, that may bring to us another 450 million. So it gets pretty important for us to set priorities. So when these funds come in, the priority is already set for the department, so they can make the recommendation. So Chair Payne, thank you. I wanted to throw that out and see if that's something that the board wants to discuss further, or just leave as a discussion point. But I'll yield the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Uemura. Are there board members that have thoughts on the previous comments? Board Member Voss and then Board Member Cox.
I have some, I understand what Ken's saying, but I have some more immediate questions, because, I mean, as Mr. Rosenly said in his testimony, Lynn said this, I think Brian did as well. I mean, there's lots and lots of uncertainties as to the next biennium. Way too many moving parts to even set anything more than priorities in a general sense. But I want to focus, Brian, on this fiscal year, because we as a board and the department have a responsibility to make sure we have the cash available to pay our bills. And so I want to focus on the two big items here, and then I have a couple of follow-up questions. So school food service, you're projecting a shortfall of anywhere from $20 to $25 million. Brian, does the department currently have the money to cover that shortfall?
No, currently no, we do not. The program is actually running into cash flow problems as we speak.
As we speak. Okay. In the current fiscal year, and I want all the board members to understand this. Second question, as to the teacher differential pilot program. Well, I'm sorry, it's in your chart, it's pilot program. The board respectfully disagreed with that. But you have it here as a $32.5 million shortfall. In the current fiscal year, Brian, does the department have the money to pay those through the year ended June 30th?
No, we do not.
So then let's focus on those two programs, because those are two that I think the board has set forth with significant, priority on. What happens if these funds or other funds are not approved to pay those bills during this fiscal year ended June 30th?
Two options, I think. We either end the year with a deficit, we just keep going as we currently are, status quo, and run a deficit, or we start shutting down other areas and other operations and seeking savings and reallocating there, on top of the restrictions that have already been imposed on the department, the 10% for ED and 2 and 300 and $100 million reduction. So those are basically our two choices. We either have to scale back what we're doing elsewhere, or
is it a realistic and legal option to just simply run it at a deficit and use and pay bills with money we don't have?
no, that's really not a reasonable option, especially with both options. But logistically, with food service, we're starting to feel the challenges now. They're having vendors that need to be paid, and we're having to look to borrow funds from other programs until if we can find a better solution for that, which is what we're proposing in front of you today.
Thank you, Brian. And as always, I appreciate your candor. Last question. When would the board, consistent with its policy, need to approve the use of these funds in the current fiscal year, at least for the food service and the teacher differentials, to make sure that the money is available to pay them?
If you're asking me, I would say a month ago, but now would certainly address a lot of uncertainty that we have in the current fiscal year. And if there's still uncertainty for another month, we may need to start looking at shutting some activities down in other areas of our operations in order to save money to do this. I think we've already done quite a bit of that.
Okay, so I understand the department's strong recommendation is for certainty, and I agree with Ken, certainty is important, that you would like the board to approve at the very least these ESSER funds for those two programs. Are there any other expenditures that are, in your view, critical that the board needs to approve and commit these funds now to make sure there are not dangerous consequences?
I think the next tier would be the two unemployment insurance and workers' compensation. But given the size, if the board is inclined to come back and look at this in a month, those are actually, we can manage that within existing resources at this time for another month.
Thank you, Brian, for those answers.
I don't expect much to change, and I think we'll be right back with the same request.
Understood, Brian. Chair, I think the board needs to seriously consider, at the very least, approving the expenditure of the funds for the school food service and the teacher differentials for the reasons that Brian just said.
Thank you very much, Board Member Voss. Board Member Cox, followed by Vice Chair Uemura.
I actually was trying to list down what Vice Chair Uemura was saying for his idea of priorities, and so I would like for him to repeat it again so that I can think about whatever it was he said.
Okay, go ahead, Vice Chair Uemura.
Oh boy, Member Cox, you really make me work this meeting. But let me before I repeat that, let me just ask a question to CFO Hallett based on Member Voss's question. And one of the things that, because I do remember asking you early on the differentials is pay as you go, because they're getting paid. So the funding of $32.5 million is a lot of it has been paid out already, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and then similar to the food service, is that a forward dollar amount, or what I'm trying to look at the timing of this, trying to look at where the gaps are, so that when we look at the food service, do we really have to fund 21 million now? You know, can we fund 15 million? Same thing with the differentials. And the reason I'm asking it is more of, you know, it's a cash flow question. But think about it, Brian. But I'm going to answer Member Cox's question on the I think Member Cox, you wanted me to just repeat the priorities. Is that correct?
Yes, so that I can,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So my recommendation, and this is really based on that. We know there's a third stimulus package coming under the Biden administration. So it's important for us to set priorities to give to the department so that when they come up with their recommendations, they're not going all over the board and trying to fill the pukas. They're looking at the priorities that the board have set and then filling it according to the priorities. So the priorities I looked at was to fund teachers extra compensation through the biennium year ended 2023. Fund all of the teacher positions that was cut due to the 10% cost reductions. And fund to protect any potential cut in teacher pay, either through permanent cuts or furlough. And then you look at funding other needs. And the reason I did it that way, because the immediate needs for us right now is the teachers and the angst we're creating for them. If we wait until May to determine, because that's when the legislature, we use 123 million as an example, using to cover that, then I'm not sure any of us want to be put in that position, not knowing what's going to happen for another 3 months. So what I'm trying to do is say, look, we have this money in our hands. There's a strong possibility that we're going to have more funds. And there is a possibility that there's 123 million that we can get from the legislature. So let's fund the most critical needs that we have right now with $103.6 million. And then look to see how the other sources of funding will fund the other needs. But if we start spreading out our needs, and I understand stability and all this, but that's almost being like it's long-term. And we don't have the long-term view right now. We have to look at the short-term and also know that the federal stimulus money is temporary, but it'll give us the financial bridge for us to accomplish the short-term needs, and then also give us the time to address some of these other concerns on a permanent basis. So that's the reason why I presented it that way. So is it clear to you?
So can I
Member
just,
Cox?
can I ask one more thing? So in other words,
Sure.
you would put however much for school food service and the differentials, and then those priorities that you talked about. Is that, am I following that?
Actually, no, I put everything in front of that because, you know, what Member Bruce brought up is key as well. And that's why I was asking CFO Brian, what is the cash flow implications? Because, you know, if we can wait a month, right, and we get stimulus funding that comes in a month, then, you know, we should be funding our current needs. And, you know, of course, fund those. But that's going to be under other needs. But that's going to be based on a recommendation again from the department. And I can see what Member Voss is saying, and I think that's a good point. But I really want to get a better handle on the cash numbers on that, because I don't think those are whole numbers that we may be looking at. We might be looking at partial numbers, and we can fund some others later in May or April, as an example, versus now.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. It's just, I'm kind of with Board Member Voss on, I want those differentials taken care of.
Yeah, and the differentials are being taken care of in the priority list. It's number one. It's number one in the list.
Okay, Board Member Fallon, your hand is up.
Thank you, Chair Payne. This question, I guess, is for Brian. Brian, on the use of the ESSER funds and the eligibility for ESSER funds, the state has a maintenance of effort requirement. And I believe from what I read somewhere, it's the funding level to the DOE for, is it 2017, 2018, 2019, as required maintenance of effort. So can you please clarify exactly what the maintenance of effort dollar amount over what period of time is, number one? And number two, on the dollar amount, what would the ledge need to fund in general fund to abide by the maintenance of effort requirement by the feds?
Thank you for that question. So on page 5 of the memo is the reference to that maintenance of effort. You're exactly right about it would be based on the state budget and the portion of the budget for education to maintain in fiscal year 22 the same proportion as the average over fiscal year 17, 18, and 19. This is a challenging calculation for the department to run, in that we don't have full information of all departments' budgets. But when we look at the budget in brief, looking back historically over 17, 18, and 19, the department's budget was approximately 22% of the total state budget. When we look at the budget in brief that was submitted for this year, it was quite a bit lower. The challenge in projecting exactly how much would be needed, there are implications for, we don't know what's happening with other departments' budgets, which affects, I guess, the denominator and the numerator. It's our number. We don't know either our budget or the rest of the State Department's total budget yet. I think once we see the House draft of the budget, we can get a sense of a better sense for you and report back to you on that. But what we were seeing in the original budget proposal put forth by the state administration, we were pretty far away from the state being able to give assurance that maintenance of effort would be met, which is what the federal guidelines call for.
So thank you, Brian. So I guess I'm trying to understand, if we were to make a decision about funding, which is quite a large dollar amount, the positions to be maintained through ESSER funding at this time, and the state didn't use general funds, is there kind of a ballpark around how much in jeopardy taking that policy action would mean to maintenance of effort? Or what are
I
your
apologize.
thoughts?
We have a rough calculation that we've done. I don't have it in front of me. It's something we can provide to the board following this meeting.
Right. Because I am we all are very concerned about wanting to tap into ESSER funds. And we also don't want to obligate the ESSER funds to something that will jeopardize our maintenance of effort eligibility. So it's a balance. And so as we look at what we might support in the priority area, which, I like that idea, I am concerned that if we prioritize and fund too much, it may negatively impact the budget, maintenance of effort, and the school's ability to, have sustainable general funded positions. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Board Member Fallon. Are there other board members who have questions either for the superintendent or for CFO Hallett, or for other board members to clarify comments that they have made? Board Member Fallon, did you have something else you wanted to say, or is your... Oh, okay, Board Member Voss, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on what Ken said, and he's right. I was concerned about cash, and he's also right that on a cash basis, the amounts necessary for the remainder of the fiscal year should be somewhat less than are listed here on the apportionment. Although there has been, a robbing Peter to pay Paul thing going on here in the sense that other program monies have been tapped to make sure that, for example, the teacher differentials have been paid. So I remain concerned about funding for those programs for the remainder of the fiscal year. And I think it is important that we communicate to the legislature and the community as at large that we believe that particularly these two funded programs should remain fully funded. So I would amend my motion to the effect of that the board approve the department's expenditure of funds in the amounts necessary to ensure that the teacher differential program and the school's food service program is fully funded through the balance of the fiscal year, June 30th, and defer the remainder, approval of the remainder of the funds consistent with the priorities that Ken laid out.
Thank you. I think I got most of that, but before we go on, we'll just consider that part of the discussion before it's formally entered. And Board Vice Chair Uemura.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I don't want to belabor the point, but and Member Voss is absolutely correct. But my concern is if we are sending a message to the teachers about the differentials, and the board has already stated that we didn't think the differentials had an end date to it, but because of the federal funding that has come through, by making a motion to just fund it to June of 2021, you are still leaving the teachers hanging in a sense that they don't know what the futures are. And also for those teachers that have lost positions because of the cut, they're out there thinking what's going to happen to them. So I think the board has a responsibility to at least assure them that with the federal funding that we have coming in, that the funds would be used to pay the differentials and to restore the teacher positions, and if possible, protect against any pay cuts. I mean, I think we need to do that because I think that's the assurance that the testimonies would tell you. That's what the testimonies have come across, that they're all depending on it. And if we set a date only to June of 2021, then it's really not meeting, to me, our obligation. So that's the point I wanted to make. But so for Member Voss, if you can carry that a little further, I think that would go a long way in resolving some of my issues anyway.
Okay, go ahead. Respond, it's fine.
Sure. Sorry, Catherine, I'm sorry about this back and forth. Ken, I am fine with amending my motion to call for the department, give the approval to expend these ESSER 2 funds to cover the teacher differential through fiscal year 2022, if that's what you like. Because I agree with you, it's an important program and we need to fund it. And again, my primary concern is to make sure that the department has the cash to meet its critical needs for the balance of the fiscal year, which based on this is primarily the teacher differentials as well as the food service. So if you want to recast my motion, I'm fine with it, but I'm okay if you want, subject obviously to the other board members' approval, to approve potentially the teacher differential funding through 2022. I'm not sure.
Board Member Takeno, followed by Board Member Fallon.
Thank you, Board Chair. I've been trying to follow this conversation and actively listen. So I think there is another component that Ken has brought up, and I think it's a very important component, which is basically, does this include also preventing any cuts to the weighted student formula? Because that then impacts, I believe, the potential cut of teacher positions at the schools. And I think that's a significant factor because we might lose more teachers through a cut than what is being given out on these differentials. So I think there's more to the, I guess, the issue of continuing with the differentials. I think there's an issue of ensuring what I think this board has promised, that we would want to see the very least impact to the schools. And that cuts to the schools, whether it be positions, services, or programs and support, would be the last thing that we do. So if we have the money now, why don't we utilize that to at least, like what Ken is saying, carry us over through this very difficult time financially? Because I don't think we can afford giving teachers who have been told maybe in the months prior that their position is in jeopardy and they start looking. So I still think there is another piece that we need to discuss in this. With that, I yield the floor.
Thank you. And maybe before I call on Board Member Fallon, could I ask for clarification from CFO Hallett? When I read that there is a 99% return, so it's only a 1% deduction from the weighted student formula, does that address the issue that Board Member Takeno brought up? Because that's the weighted student formula for the fiscal year 2022.
Correct. That's what we have detailed out in attachment. Sorry, attachment B. Yes, that 99% of schools will have access to 99% of weighted student formula. We're just withholding 1% to meet the reduction.
Okay, so that along with the 100% of the 150, EDN 150, would address most of what Board Member Takeno was talking about as far as teacher cuts for fiscal year 2022?
Yes, I think it could actually be said it addresses all of it in that in the current year, schools are subject to a 2.4% restriction. And this actually that puts them on better footing next year with only a 1%.
Okay, thank you. And going back, Board Member Fallon, followed by Board Member Uemura.
Thank you, Chair Payne, Board Member Fallon. I just wanted to add, this is related to the 9 million for the charters. My understanding is that we need to approve this, and therefore I would like to propose we add that to the list. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you. I think that's very important. I appreciate your reminding that. Board Member Uemura.
Thank you, Chair Payne. I'm sorry we're going back and forth on this, but this is we got the superintendent's board update. I think I got it this morning, I guess, or maybe last night. But and you're right on the restoration, but the caveat to that is the source of that is from the governor. So that's 123 million. And I had gone through and discussed that 123 million is really at the level of the legislature, the governor, because he submitted it after, if he gave it to the board after he submitted his budget, the legislative control over that. So if we look at that as saying that that's what's going to happen, that was my example. We're going back to the same thing we're doing with the teacher differentials being not guaranteed, and we may be in the same position again if we count on that, because we may not get it. But the burning hand is the federal stimulus funding. So that's why I'm saying you got to take a look at that and restore all of that to the federal funding, because that'll give us the financial bridge of about 2 years to get our economy back up, seeing how we can get this built into the budget again. But so that's the reason. So I don't want the board to think that by stating that it's something that's going to happen, because that's where we got in trouble back in January of 2020. So I just wanted to make that clear. And as far as the what I was looking at, this is to address members' voss, is on the motion to take care of the teacher differentials. I was really looking at covering it through the biennium, which will give us 2 years. But I'm okay if it is more palatable to the board to do it to the end of 2022, because when the additional stimulus funds comes through, we can address the last year then. If you get, so really what I'm doing is I'm looking at the calendar, looking at the timing of where the funds are coming in and when the disbursements got to go, and trying to manage that. And I think that's what CFO Hallett is trying to do as well. But I think he's constrained more because he has certain things he has to do within his responsibility. But as a board member, I can throw that out. I haven't dealt with it in my previous experiences. So I just wanted to clarify that. So I'm not sure where we are in the motion, because what I really want to see is the board at this point in time approve setting priorities for the superintendent, because it's going to make the DOE job much easier in terms of how they're going to recommend funds. And if the funding comes through as we think it will, there'll be a lot of room for the department to address other things, investment in programs, looking at her learning program, things of that sort. But right now, the timing is critical. Right now, we have to address what's in front of us. And that's why I'm saying, we know our liability in front of us. We know what the revenue source is. We have it in hand. Let's apply it together and let's get this done. So hopefully I will yield the floor for the last time.
Thank you, Vice Chair Uemura. Board Member Takeno, followed by Board Member Fallon.
Thank you, Board Chair. And thank you very much, Board Member Uemura. In providing that explanation, I think that's where the concern is, that, and maybe this is to CFO Hallett, that what would happen if we don't get the funding? What would happen to the weighted student formula? Would it have now go back to the schools and have some readjustments, meaning there will be adverse consequences to teacher positions? So what could transpire if we don't get the money from the ledge, as what was submitted in addition to the governor's budget?
So in the release, this is Brian, in the release of the financial plan templates to schools so they could go in and start programming the use of restored funds, that was very much a concern and question on schools' minds. Can we really count on this? How much, to what extent can we count on this? To which we had to share just last night on a call with about 80 principals that we believe this is a informed, calculated risk that we need to take given TATP and the timing and the need to let our employees know what they can expect for next year. This is informed in part by a combination of the improved revenue picture with the Council on Revenues in January and the likelihood that at their next meeting in March, they would see continued growth, given that they were publicly acknowledging their conservative projection in January. Also, given the maintenance of effort that has been discussed today, I don't think that folks we've really had a full accounting of how people are interpreting that. It seems very black and white to us that the state needs to give assurance and maintain levels of funding. And that issue is a state level issue. And the third piece that gives some level of comfort to inform that decision would be what's happening with Congress in moving the $1.9 trillion relief plan through. That is described today would help at both the state and local funding level, as well as funding direct to education. Both of those will certainly help improve the picture for next year. So with that information, we don't think that there is a huge downside risk that in May or June, we would be reversing what schools are in the process of restoring right now.
So while it may be less likely than not, I would like to know what would be the after effects or aftermath if it does happen.
I think superintendent has been addressing that in several forums about a desire to, once the dust settles on the legislature's action with the budget, to come back and have a conversation with the board on our intended use of all federal funds. So if worst case scenario and the department ends up, our public schools end up with having disproportionate cuts relative to the rest of state government, and we are unable to fund with general funds schools' financial plans, then I think the conversation will come back to relooking at the federal fund plan.
So today we have a chance as board members to maybe provide a level of certainty, right? By saying that we would want to make sure that we pay for what, like board member Wayne Morris is saying, we pay for what's before us right now, to provide that level of certainty and reduce the level of anxiety that, in most part, we all were part of that. And I think I'm more with what board member William Moore is saying, that if we have the money now, we should use it. And we hope that more money will be coming in later, and that the department can utilize those funds for other different needs. But we should set what our priorities are, because our priorities would be the message that would be sent down to the schools and to the personnel within the department. And so, I'm more inclined to follow what board member Uemura is saying. Set the priorities. I think it's easier for the department to then follow the priorities. And with that, I yield. Thank you.
So just as a refresher before Lynn Fallon speaks, I think we need to say what our priorities are so that we can make sure that this is the directions that we give. And what I'm hearing, and correct me if I leave anything out, but I'm hearing that our priorities as a board are the differentials for our teachers that are already established, the maintenance of our staff positions, which would be in weighted student formula or in special education, and services that support these students, and specifically school food service is one that is struggling the most. Are there others that should be on this list? And with that, I'll let Lynn Fallon and then Board Vice Chair Uemura.
Thank you, Chair Payne. I agree on the priorities, and I also agree on the need for predictability and certainty for the schools. So it seems to me that when you think about, we've discussed sustainability long-term for the differentials and various ways to approach it. But overall, related to the priorities, because the federal funds are temporary in nature, I hope we can send some kind of message about using the federal funds if the general funds are not available, do not become available. So that regardless we've made a commitment to support the schools and the concerns that have been articulated in the various testimony. I just want to be sure that we don't not give up, but we don't not support the policy of the need for long-term sustainability. So it's like general funds first, and then if general funds are not available, absolutely use the federal funds. And that's our commitment to the priorities as we've identified at this time. I mean, I'm optimistic and I'm hopeful that the ledge, as it has in the past, has supported public ed. And I'm hopeful that somehow that will happen legislatively. But either way, we do need that certainty for schools. So that's kind of what I'm proposing. Some conditions that and an assurance that the schools are supported.
Do you yield, Board Member Fallon? Okay.
Yes, I yield. Thank you.
Vice Chair Uemura?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add to the priority list was to fund to protect any potential cut in teacher pay, either through permanent cuts or furlough. So, there's 3 areas, the differentials, the teacher positions, and potential cuts if there's a furlough. So those are the 3 priorities. And then, of course, as Member Fallon has said, the charter schools, the 9 million goes to them. Definitely, it's part of the funding of that amount. So,
What about the food service issue, which seems to be at a crisis point right now?
I don't, that'll be like fund other needs. And I think what Member Voss said is absolutely correct. I mean, if it's something that we need to fund because they don't have the money to fund it, then we need to, that should be part of the priority. That can be line item in there, because there's only so much dollars available. That's why I was agreeable to limit the extra teacher compensation to 2022, which that brings another 32.5 million into the fold. But then address it when the new stimulus money comes in, hopefully next month. So you can see I'm playing the timing game here.
I heard that, but I also heard from CFO Hallett that they're already short at food service and they have bills that haven't been paid that need to be paid. So that sounds like an emergency situation. And I know that our kids, particularly again, our most vulnerable students, depend on food service for breakfast and lunch. And going into 4th quarter, we're going to have a lot more kids in school. So just thinking about that.
And I agree, Chair. And I think the last we left was that we're going to get the CFO Hallett to kind of refine those numbers, because this is a cash basis payout.
Okay.
So once we get those numbers, you can sort of plunk it in there. But I have no objections to putting that as part of your priorities.
Okay, so what I've heard so far, and raise your hand if you want to add or clarify, is that directions to the department about the board's priorities for spending federal money if general funds are not available to cover would be teacher differential, teacher positions in ED 100 and 150, and possible remediation if there are teacher pay cuts. So those are kind of clustered together as support at the school level. And then food service or other critical situations where bills are coming and have not been paid. So anybody else have any thoughts or comments on this? Because we now need to go back. Once we've asked all the questions we need to ask, we have to redo the motion. And I see Board Member Takeno's hand up, so go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Bay. Board Member Takeno here. So I guess, am I interpreting correct that the department will go back, take a look at the priorities, and then come back to us with how they're going to now spend the federal money, and until such time, no money will be allocated to any type of budgetary deficits or programs, both new and proposed?
That's not what I was hearing. And again, correct me, but I was hearing that we are going to authorize the funding for the differentials. And there was discussion about whether it was through this year or through this year and next year. And that we were going to authorize the addressing of the teacher positions through the weighted student formula if necessary, and pay cuts. That was still something that people said they wanted. And then the immediate crisis that is facing our food service program. Those would be the directions and the authority to spend those. I see Superintendent has a comment, and then Bruce Voss. Yes, and but you still have the floor, Board Member Takeno.
So I'm just wondering, when would that come back to the board? Because I think the caveat that I'm most concerned about is that if we don't get the general funds, then it's going to be used in such a way. But wouldn't that take us all the way down to late April? I mean, the last week of April?
I understood from the discussion that we were thinking of looking at what additional funds come in, which might change some of the line items that are currently being proposed.
But those additional funds are the federal potential federal money, not the state.
Right. So
that hook with the, if there is not enough general fund appropriations, is concerning, because again, we have the money to pay it now, but I don't want the money to be spent until these things are understood. Like we understand we have enough money to pay for the extra compensation. We have the money to restore the weighted student formula to back to 100%, special ed, and all these other things, right? Prevent teacher pay cuts, the food service. We have all of this money, we got it in. So now we can use the federal stuff for other things. That would be the most optimal way, right? Because again, we know we got the money in the bank just in case we don't have it. So that's where I want to make sure that we are going to ensure that there will be money no matter what. So how are we going to make that happen? Because I think we're going to make a promise today, right? We're making a promise today. I don't want the promise to be, well, we're more likely than not it's going to happen. That's not a promise. A promise is you either give or you don't, right? So I want to make that promise today that we're going to maintain the extra compensation. We're going to maintain teachers, or school level employees' pay. We're going to prevent cuts to school level employees. I just want to make sure that we can guarantee it, because we do have the cash to pay for it. So with that, I yield.
Okay, thank you. And Board Member Voss, followed by Superintendent Kishimoto.
So with regard to Dwight's comments, what Lynn was saying earlier about the need for recurring stable funds, and the superintendent has said this before too, and this is one of the reasons why she's made a distinction between these one-time funds and the recurring general funds that would be appropriated by the legislature on a continuing basis, which, to be clear, we want for the teacher differential program, among others. If we take the view well, this money is in the bank now and we've allotted it for this, we're all but inviting the legislature to say, oh, you've got the money, so we're not going to appropriate it for the general funds. And then we have the law of unintended consequences. We have done exactly what we said we didn't want to do, and what we want to do is to preserve ongoing general fund funding for our key resources to support the classroom. So I think the answer is a little different than what Dwight said. I think it is that we would be authorizing the department to spend funds from these ESSER funds as necessary this year in amounts to be reported to the board to close the funding gaps for the school food service program and the teacher differential program, as well as the allocation to charter schools. And then for the balance of the funds, and this would be the overwhelming majority, to come back to the board with a spending plan for the balance of the federal funds based on what is actually appropriated by the legislature. That's what I understand that we would be doing. And the priorities that the department's spending plan would have for these ESSER funds are the ones that the chair articulated.
Okay, Superintendent Kishimoto, I did, just Bruce, I wrote down as much as I could of what you said, but we may need clarification of that. So if you could write that down, thank you. Superintendent Kishimoto, go ahead.
Yes, board members, I just want to make sure that I'm not neglecting a reminder, just to make sure I'm fully understanding. The conversation about wages, hours, or other conditions of work are subject to negotiations, and there were comments made about safeguarding against whether it's furloughs or cuts to wages. We're currently in negotiations for the teacher's master contract, and the board is involved in those negotiations. So I just want to be careful that you don't obligate something outside of negotiations that's actively in progress. So just wanted to remind you of that language that I thought I heard used that sounded like we were trying to put into or that you were trying to put into the list of priorities that sounded like we were trying to solve something outside of negotiations that's inside of negotiations right now. Thank you.
Yes, you're correct, Superintendent. I did say fund teacher pay cuts so that we wouldn't have the pay cuts, but your point is very well taken. So back to those priorities that what I heard Bruce say, and let me just say it best I can, and then Bruce, you might need to say it again, but that the motion would then be authorizing the department to spend the ESSR funds as necessary to close the gaps in the priority areas we identified, which would be, of course, the charters. There's no gap there. We have to give them that percentage. Then the food service, the teacher differentials, and fully funding weighted student formulas for EDN 100 and 150. Is that correct? And then they would come back to us with a spending plan with the new federal monies and our knowledge then of what the state legislature will be funding the department. Is that basically it, Board Member Voss?
Sort of. To be clear, to be clear.
I'll write it down again.
No, it is, and we're all kind of making this up as we go along, but this is important stuff.
Yeah.
What I was trying to emphasize is to give the department, consistent with Brian's testimony, the authority to spend as much of the ESSER II funds as is necessary to cover the shortfalls in the current fiscal year through June 30th for the school food service and particularly the teacher differentials, as well as, of course, providing the money for charter schools. And so this is only for the current fiscal year shortfalls, which are important, the cash needs. And then with the balance of the federal funds, which would be the overwhelming majority of this 183 million and potentially more, as Ken said, the department comes back to us in or about May, after the legislature is over and we know how much they have allocated pursuant to the general funds budget, with a proposal to expend the balance of the federal funds consistent with the priorities that you, Ken, and Dwight have articulated. That's my motion.
Okay, comments on the motion. I see Board Member Takeno's hand up.
Thank you, Board Chair. Board Member Takeno. So it's explicitly to those 3 areas only. Am I correct, Board Member Voss?
Are you talking about in the current fiscal year, Dwight?
In the current fiscal year, yeah, ending 2021.
And my motion is for that because those, at least 2 of them, are the 2 that the department has identified as clear and important shortfall areas. For all I know, there are others, but my motion only concerns those 2 because those are the only 2 currently identified by the department.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I yield.
Board Member, Board Vice Chair Uemura.
Thank you. I just wanted to also make sure that when we look at the differential funding, is for future differential funding. It doesn't end it, because there's 2 parts to the bill. One is what Member Voss had mentioned, the current, which is 32.5, but I also mentioned that my initial priority was to fund the differentials for the biennium budget, which is going out to 2023. But I said I was willing to bring that back to 2022, knowing that we can look at that with the new stimulus money that should be coming in March or April. So I don't want to make sure that the funding doesn't stop, because if you stop it at 2021, there's no funding for 2022 or 2023. Does it make sense?
Point is well taken. The fiscal year ends June 30th. So
Yes.
what you're saying is that that they should put money in the bank for the teacher differentials for the fiscal year 2022.
Yeah. And
In
then,
addition to covering the shortage for this year.
yeah, so you're going to cover the shortfall in Member Voss's initial, which is 32.5. But I want to make sure that, we extend it to the 2022. But we also have to remember the biennial budget to 2023. So we need to address that in our future recommendations. So.
Okay, I hear that, and I see Superintendent Kishimoto's hand is up. Do you have a comment on that?
My apologies.
Oh, okay. So what I've written down is authorizing the department to spend as much of the ESSR2 funds as necessary to close the gap in the current fiscal year in food service and teacher differentials, and to cover teacher differentials for fiscal year 2022. In addition, the full amount will be made for the charter schools, and the department is directed to come back to the board with, once the new federal funding is clear and the legislative funding for the state provision to the department is clear, for the board to address the remaining shortfalls. Is that it? Basically, the staff will probably clean it up for me, but yeah.
Chair, this is Board Member Voss.
Yes.
Your recitation accurately describes, I think, what collectively me, Dwight, and Ken have, and I think it is an appropriate and prudent compromise under the circumstances. I yield.
Okay, Board Member Fallon, go right ahead.
Thank you, Chair Payne. Board Member Fallon, could you please restate the proposed action?
Okay, I have, I'm gonna let board member Namau speak because I've got notes all over the page here that I would like to put a little more coherently. And if board member Namau, go right ahead, and I'm gonna try to make this a little clearer.
Mahalo, Chair Payne. This is board member Namau. I just want to thank my fellow colleagues for whittling this down into something coherent that we can all vote on. I understand. Well, first of all, Bruce, I think what Chair Payne has cobbled together thus far, and I'm sure she's going to make it more articulate so that we can be really clear. I think I'm going to vote for this. I think this is really good. I know that we're trying to reassure the teachers out there that we support them, that we're here to support them no matter what. And so, and at the same time, it's kind of a balancing act because we don't want to just say, we're going to depend on our federal funds to bail us out, because we still want to hear from the legislators that they're going to provide general funds and hopefully reinstate those funds to the department. So I think this is a really good compromise for now. We're trying to take care of some critical needs that need to be addressed immediately, that we're going to be able to reassure teachers that we're in their corner, we're there to support them, that we're taking some time out to figure out when new federal funds are coming down the pipeline, and then to address the department and let them know that we are looking to see what kind of spending priorities that they will have when these additional funds are made available to us. So thank you for making this all happen. I appreciate Dwight Takeno and Lynn Fallon for bringing up some specific issues, and for Vice Chair Uemura for his insight as well. So mahalo, Bruce. Thank you to all.
Thank you, Keely. Is there anyone else who would like to say something? Board member Bakarse, go right ahead.
Aloha, board member Kamana Bakarsi here. I just wanted to, as with board member Namau, express my appreciation to my fellow board members. I don't have anything more to add. All of my concerns were addressed in the other board members' comments, but I just wanted to show appreciation for the how can attitude, really solving these issues and problems and moving forward in a very collaborative and concise way. So mahalo nui. I yield the floor.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? I think I'm ready to read. See what you think. The board authorizes the department to spend as much of the ESSR2 funds as necessary to allocate the required amount to the charter schools, to close the gaps in the current fiscal year in the differentials and food service, and to cover differentials for fiscal year 22. The department is further directed to return to the board for further discussions once the new federal funds are allocated and the state legislature has finalized the budget for the Department of Education for fiscal year 22. Any thoughts on, did I miss anything? Does that cover it? There's silence.
Chair, this is Board Member Voss. I think, I don't know if we even need a second for that, but I think we're ready to vote.
Okay, I think we need a first for that because I can't make the motion. I need you to move that motion. So Board Member Uemura?
Chair, so moved.
Okay, it's been moved. And it has, I see Board Member Vokarse.
Board member Bakarsi, second.
Okay, I made a mistake. We forgot to vote on withdrawing the current motion that is on the floor. So can we back up, please? And Bruce, you need to withdraw, and I'm going to ask if there are objections, and if there are none, then we'll move to this current motion. Okay.
So withdrawn, Chair.
Okay, are there any objections to the motion being withdrawn by Bruce? Okay, there are none. So now we're going to go back and I'm going to say we had this motion was made by Vice Chair Uemura and seconded by Board Member Bakarse. Is there any discussion on this further? Seeing none, we're going to take the vote. Okay. Okay, so my roll call vote, starting with Board Vice Chair Uemura,
Aye.
Board Member Asher,
Aye.
Board Member Bakarse,
Aye.
Board Member Cox,
Aye.
Board Member Fallon,
Aye.
Board Member Nama'u,
Aye.
Board Member Takeno,
Aye.
and Board Member Voss.
Aye.
Okay, that motion passed. So thank you very much. That was a good discussion, I think. We are now moving on to item C in our action items, which is board action on election of committee chairperson and committee vice chairperson for Finance and Infrastructure Committee. Is there anyone who would like to testify on this item?
Yes, Board Chair. Susan Piccola Davis.
Okay.
Susan, can you hear me? Susan? Susan Piccola Davis. Susan, we don't see your microphone. So you need to enable your mic. I'll give you a couple seconds. If not, we'll need to move on. Board Chair, we will be moving on and we'll take this back up as late testimony.
Okay, and if we did receive testimony on this agenda item, it is publicly published on our website. The position of Chair of the Board's Finance and Infrastructure Committee is currently vacant. In accordance with our bylaws, we must elect officers to the Finance and Infrastructure Committee. Before we start discussing this agenda item, I'd like to again remind board members to raise your hands and wait for me to call on you. We need to have a motion if there's anyone who either would like to volunteer or who would like to suggest the name of someone. I appreciate that Bruce Voss has stepped forward as the vice chair to handle things in the recent interim, but we do need to have a motion for a new chair and subsequently a new vice chair, or if necessary, a new vice chair. Board Member Nama'u. Take your mic off.
Yes, Chair Payne. I would like to propose a motion to nominate Bruce Voss as the chair for the FIC committee, and at the same time to also, if I can at this time, to nominate Lynn Fallon as the vice chair for this committee.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second to that motion? And then we can discuss it and those who have been nominated can have their say. Vice Chair Uemura?
Oh, I second the motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we select Bruce Voss as chair of the FIC committee and Lynn Fallon as vice chair. Any discussion on this? And I guess we need to hear from Bruce and Lynn if they're willing to take this on. Board Member Voss?
Thanks, Chair. I appreciate the nomination. I'm willing to serve if the board wants me to. And I really hope that Lynn accepts as vice chair because I think we all have benefited by her questions this year and hope if she joins as vice chair, she continues to ask questions because the only way you get answers is by asking questions.
Thank you very much. Board Member Fallon. Go ahead, Board Member Fallon.
Thank you, Chair Payne and Board Member Nama'u. I'm happy to help where needed. I just want you to know that I'm not a budget expert. I'm not an accountant. And so it is a consideration for me to support the nominee Bruce. I want to be able to support Bruce as the chair and the board as a whole. So that the background on budget is something that I am concerned about, but if supported, I will do my best and do what I can. I do have experience in other state government agencies, and I hope that will help in the committee's review of the budget and asking the questions, as Bruce said. So thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Board Member Fallon and Board Member Voss. It's much appreciated. We don't have a large board, and we really all need to carry what we can, and this is a critical committee, so I do thank both of you. We have a motion on the floor that we need to vote on. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to the motion before we vote? All right. I don't see anything, so I'm going to do a roll call vote, starting with Vice Chair Uemura. Vice Chair.
Aye. Sorry.
Board Member Asher.
Aye.
Board Member Bakarse.
Aye.
Board Member Cox.
Aye.
Board Member Fallon.
Aye.
Board Member Takeno.
Aye.
Board Member Namau.
Aye.
And Board Member Voss.
Aye.
Okay, that is approved, and thank you very much. So we are now moving to item D. This is from our legislative committee. We've noticed that there are a number of legislative proposals regarding the charter school system. And so we haven't been able to testify on these, but we would like to consider adding to our legislative policy proposal on charter school system structure and governance. Before we talk about that, I need to see if there's anyone who would like to testify on this agenda item.
Susan Piccola Davis, followed by Linda Elento. Susan Piccola Davis, can you hear me? Susan, there is still no microphone connected. I'll give you a couple seconds. Moving on to Linda Elento. Linda Elento, can you hear me? Linda Elento. Board Chair, one moment, please.
Hello.
Linda?
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed.
Oh, you can. I don't know what I did that time. Good afternoon. I'm Linda Elento, and I'll try to be as clear as I can. For my testimony, I had kind of overlaps with the first issue on the agenda that you met with on the executive session regarding another lawsuit under Title IX, and it also mentioned IDEA as well, the special ed law. A couple of parents recently asked what do they do when the school refuses to honor their request for the same gender sex for their child's escort to the bathroom or escort in the hall by themselves. That's something that people are at least two are facing that I've heard of recently, or that I've talked to. Okay, thank you for listening, but that's kind of the subject of that lawsuit. So I'm concerned. And I wanted to just mention if
excuse me, but Linda, You need to be speaking to the specific agenda item that we have here, which is board positions on charter school systems and structure and governance.
Okay. It has to do with the page 6 on that handout that was attached regarding the Department of Education's policies. I just noticed it ends with special education. I need to point out that children with disabilities may or may not qualify for IDA special ed, and they need to be included. Similar to what I've heard earlier about unfunded mandates, 504 would be one of them from the federal government. I would like to ask that we also make public or find reports from the DOE on what's being budgeted, what's being spent on that. I'm not an attorney. I wanted to bring up 2 bills, SB 538, companion is HB 838, and SB 1331. This is regarding the Hawaii Charter, or not, okay, the Commission for Civil Rights. Sorry, it's called HCRC. Hawaii Civil Rights Commission. They are wanting to basically restore what the jurisdiction they had before I had filed a complaint and asked that the commission review my 504 ADA complaint. And anyway, to go to the Hawaii Supreme Court, I wanted to let you know that the report is on the SB 538 website at the capitol.hawaii.gov, capital with an O. If you look at the testimony, that's where I posted it, within the testimony. And I wanted to point out that the DOE and the charter school kept bringing up it's a special ed matter. It was not, and it was not even brought forward to, or that the Supreme Court did not even entertain it because it wasn't brought before.
Board Chair, no further testimony on this agenda item at this time.
Excuse me, I muted myself and did not unmute. So I'm going to start again. I apologize. Before we start discussing the agenda item, I need a motion to accept the recommendation that is outlined in the document. I am recommending that the board amend our policy positions that we adopted in December 17, 2020's general business meeting for the 2021 legislative session by adopting the policy provisions proposed in this memorandum as shown in Exhibit A. And in Exhibit A, you see in red the addition to our policy position, and it states, the board supports measures that would ensure meaningful yet reasonable accountability of charter schools and their authorizers, including adequate resources and support that ensure such accountability is achievable. The board, however, opposes measures that could weaken the effectiveness of any accountability necessary for a high-quality charter school system. So I need to have a motion and then we can have a discussion. Board Member Bakarse.
Board Member Bakarse, so moved.
Board Vice Chair Uemura.
Second the motion.
Okay, so are there any comments about adding this to our policy position so that we can submit testimony as appropriate? Okay, I'm seeing none, so I'm going to go directly to the vote. And so we have a motion that's been moved and seconded, and we are now voting. Board Vice Chair Uemura.
Aye.
Board Member Asher.
Aye.
Board Member Bakarse.
Aye.
Board Member Cox.
Aye.
Board Member Fallon.
Aye.
Board Member Nama'u.
Aye. Aye.
Board Member Takeno.
Aye.
And Board Member Voss.
Aye.
Okay, that motion has been approved. And now, before we can adjourn, we need to know if there are any late testifiers on board agenda items who missed an opportunity to testify. Board staff, do we have anyone?
Yes, Board Chair. One moment, please.
Okay.
Susan Piccola Davis, agenda item 4A. Susan Piccola Davis, your microphone is still not connected. Susan Piccola Davis. Item 5D. Susan, your microphone is still not connected. Linda Elento, item 2A. Linda, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Oh, good, you
Linda.
can hear me again.
Please
All right,
proceed.
I didn't know if you, okay, I didn't know if you call me again. Thank you. Again, as it kind of overlapped, I'll just try to reiterate having another case against the school system. My concern is that IDA, 504, ADA are all separate. And it's important that the Title IX has, the federal law has a complementary Hawaii statute. It's HRS 386D as in dog. That's addressed in SB 1331 as a suggestion to add children with disabilities. I'd like you to take a look at that. I appreciate your time. And so my senator, Sarah Kalealoholi in Kaneohe, I expect he will be hearing SB 538 with Senator Rhodes. And they really need the education information because the commission just wants to restore their jurisdiction without IDEA. But the thing is IDEA is a special ed grant funding law. It is not a discrimination, disability discrimination complaint. So therefore, it is not necessary to put it in the statute. And I appreciate your time, and I hope the DOE and the Board of Education would offer testimony, even though SB 538 was not sent to the Education Committee. Instead, they've been listening to the SB 538 and the HB 838. So again, it has to do with the Hawaii Civil Rights Commission, HRS 386-1 and 1.5. That has to do with a case called Fry versus Napoleon that was decided by the U.S. Supreme Court 3 years ago. So please take a look at that Hawaii Civil Rights Commission and the DOE charter school case that went to the Hawaii Supreme Court a few years ago. Thank you.
Aravind Bayu, HSTA, agenda item 5B. Aravind, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, I can hear. Is my audio clear?
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the board and HSTA for the opportunity to speak today, and I apologize for previous technical difficulties that prevented me from testifying earlier. Simply put, I'm in strong opposition of the use of federal funding for tutors under Agendum Item 5B, and I am asking the board to use federal funding to avoid layoffs. A little bit about my background. I am a first-year teacher teaching AP Psychology and Modern History of Hawaii for high school students on Oahu. I moved to Hawaii for my love of the state and my deep desire to help the state achieve its potential and truly modernize in the education system. A few months ago, I was in front of this very board asking to avoid cuts to teacher pay. And miraculously, the board was responsive. I'd like to commend the board on their efforts as well as all legislation efforts to stop teacher furloughs, and it gave me a lot of faith to the responsiveness of such a system. However, just last month, I was called in by my principal and told that I would not be rehired next year due to budget cuts. I have been asked to fill out a separation of service form, and this feels very real to me. While these might all seem like numbers on the page to some, or even some teachers have potentially been put on the chopping block, I've had to rapidly scramble and figure out my life. So here I am in front of the board once more, and I am begging once again not for my job, but this time for an opportunity to help. I'm a highly qualified teacher with a recent bachelor's degree in the subjects that I teach. I'm tech literate and on the cutting edge of technology in the education space. I'm young, enthusiastic, dedicated, and all I'm doing is asking to help the state of Hawaii. I truly do not believe that tutors are the solution. I think in this complicated COVID crisis we all face, it is us teachers who have been on the front line, risking our time and our personal health this entire year unwaveringly in front of furloughs and all other forms of opposition. It is us that understand the context the best and us that can help the students. I understand that COVID often prevents tough situations for lawmakers and decision makers. The board is probably going to be choosing between two bad situations for quite some time to come. However, I ask the board not to throw away opportunity and not dig us even deeper in a hole. When it comes to it, it is the teachers of Hawaii that are the most dedicated and something I have been privileged enough to see over these past few years. My request is again under action item 5B, and speaking from personal experience, I hope that not only my job, but my opportunity to stay in the state of Hawaii and make a difference for our future is maintained and respected by the board. I thank you for your time.
Chairplane e Kalamayau.
Thank you. Thank you to all our testifiers, people who wrote, people who spoke. Thank you to board members for a really good conversation, I think one of our best. And I want to thank the superintendent and her staff for providing important background and for helping us through this discussion with your clarification. So thank you, everyone. And there is no further item on our agenda. So with that, the meeting is adjourned at 4:34 p.m.